You might have been to our previous webinars on this series, and we will have some more for the rest of summer, but we're lucky enough today to have Tom and Sarah to focus on journalism, travel writing, and how that can be built up into a business. So just to give you a little bit of background on Edu-venture and Gotoco, who set up these webinars with lovely guests like the two of you. Edu-venture is a new non-profit organisation aimed at empowering young people to pursue careers with a social impact. We have societies being set up at lots of universities all around the UK, and we'll be running lots of events next academic year and socials and stuff to really encourage you guys to connect with different careers that you might want to try, really help you get into unusual areas and connect with different ways that you can work abroad as well. So if you want to set up a university society and it doesn't exist at university yet, there is information about that on the website that you can check out, and I will be able to tell you a little bit more about that if you have any questions at the end of the webinar. And then Gotoco, who we have partnered with to work on this project with, are an amazing TEFL internship abroad opportunity where you can go on a free and funded internship to China in the summer, and applications for 2021 are already open, and I cannot recommend them enough. I was lucky enough to go last summer. I went for the maximum time. I think it was almost 3 months I was out there, and I had so much fun. I'm still in contact with everyone that I met out there, so I would massively recommend it. Now, during the webinar, there's a little Q&A section at the bottom where you guys can submit questions if you have anything that you would like me to ask our guest speakers. If there's a question someone submits that you feel is a really good one, please like it so that it gets upvoted so that I see it. And I think we'll get into things. So, Thomas and Sarah, it'd be amazing if you guys could introduce yourselves and what you do. Thomas, would you like to start?
Okay, yeah, my name's Thomas Bird, originally from South Wales, the Welsh Riviera, the sun-soaked city of Cardiff. And I fled suburbia in my middle 20s, and I'm now a travel writer based in East Asia, what I like to call the Sinosphere, which is maybe Greater China, places, obviously the People's Republic of China, but also Taiwan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Southeast Asia more generally. As a Mandarin speaker, I tend to gravitate to those regions, but obviously not exclusively, because travel writing can take you anywhere. That's the definition of the business. And yeah, I've been in Asia for 15 years. Published with The Guardian, CNN, Lonely Planet, Rough Guides, South China Morning Post, which is Hong Kong's newspaper of record, I write a lot for the SCMP, and a number of other publications as well. So that's me more or less.
Oh, that's so cool. And Sarah, what do you do?
So I currently run a travel company called Bespoke Travel Company. But prior to that, I was a journalist. I started out actually as an investigative news journalist for the Sunday Times in London. And then I had the opportunity to come to China to help set up Time Out magazine in China, in Beijing. And then I got to know the city pretty well during the Olympics in 2008 and that kind of period. And just after that, I decided to set up my own travel company. There was a lot of content. It was quite a content-focused company at the beginning, and then it sort of morphed over the next 10 years into a more sort of high-end, customized tour company for people that wanted something more immersive and different, and kind of intellectually curious travelers who wanted to get off the beaten path and eat in the best restaurants, whether they were the cheapest or the most expensive, that kind of thing. Yeah, and I still write occasionally for a few publications, and a little bit more now that my travel company is obviously struggling due to COVID. So I started writing again.
I love that. Got something solid to fall back on though. You clearly got the skills. So I think a lot of students especially would really be wondering, how did you guys get started? So what did you study in university? And then what did you do after university? Like, how did you get into the writing world? Thomas, could you maybe start us off?
Okay, so a lot of people go to university and they major in whichever A level, AS level they were best at, and they do English literature, they do psychology, and then they graduate and they never really use those skills again. I'm sort of different in many ways in that I use almost everything I used at university, which is strange because I came to university not really knowing what I wanted to do. So I chopped and changed with my major and various elective courses. So in my undergraduate period, although I ended up with an English literature degree, I did courses in filmmaking, photography, website design, theatre, French, just because I was kind of intensely curious. And then in the last year, they told me that my degree would just be called Combined Arts because I'd had no solid thread. And so I panicked and took all the English literature courses and sort of ended up that way. But it's strange that since I write a lot about photography, for instance, which I did a few courses in. I've written about filmmaking, which I studied. I did my Erasmus in France. That was a sort of testing the legs of living overseas and what challenges you might confront, even though France isn't obviously as far away as somewhere like China. And then for my master's degree, which I did after 2 years teaching in China, I did that in Chinese studies in SOAS. So very much orientated to this part of the world, but I still took all the courses that I probably would have taken undergrad. So I did Chinese literature and Chinese film and Chinese anthropology because I already had the theoretical skills, I suppose. But yeah, in terms of what I majored in and what I do, there's a very direct relationship. And one of the most important courses, I think, was just a random that I selected, which was called Writing the Self, Anthropology and Travel Writing. And it was just, you know, for a second year undergrad, it was just boom, wow, Bruce Chatwin, boom, wow, Paul Theroux. All these people that I've spent my adult life trying to emulate since were either introduced then or via them. I was led to these other fantastic travel writers.
So cool. So I think you went to Exeter University, didn't you?
Well, there's actually there's a blurry line here. I always say I was in Exeter. I was in fact in Plymouth University, but at the time, the arts campus was in Exeter. So we never actually, I don't think I ever went to Plymouth once. It's a arbitrary degree to have. You know, I drifted into it just like I drifted into the many courses I took. It wasn't a plan like I need to go to that prestigious university or I need to do this major, but it worked out well. And then with SOAS on top, obviously SOAS is a bit more of a name university, and it was much more of a focused thing. And I recommend that more for master's degree. You know, don't do a master's degree unless it's really going to take you somewhere. But as an undergrad, just do everything and anything, because that's the rules of the game. You've got 3 years where, you know, the norms of society do not apply. And if you're not playing in an experimental punk band and, you know, painting avant-garde pictures and protesting whichever war, then you're not doing it right. I did all of those things. I also worked in the, I don't know, I think it's still there, the Phoenix Art Center in Exeter. It was
yeah, it is. Yeah.
I was, which was great. It was a great job because I saw every band and artist for sort of 3 years for free. So also
Amazing. I need to get involved in more of these things. I wish we had travel writing on my course. I do English literature at Exeter University, but sadly that was not on my options. Sarah, what did you study at university, and how has it led to where you are now?
I also studied English literature. Luckily, I was able to do a travel writing course, but it was 18th century travel writing. So it was a lot of hot air balloons and people going away to warmer climes for their health and stuff like that. But it was quite fun. So I was I was kind of a geeky kid, and I read a book when I was about, I don't know how old I must have been, maybe like 11 or 10 or something, called Scoop. But not the Evelyn Waugh version. It was a kid's version. It was like Famous Five or Secret Seven. I don't know if any of you guys know what the hell that is. But it was a kind of exciting adventure group of kids that essentially solved the crime, and they were like little journalists who solved the crime and got it in their local newspaper. And honestly, from that moment on, I was just gripped, and I knew that this was the job that I wanted to do as an adult. So from a really young age, I just knew I wanted to be a journalist. It's what I told everyone I wanted to do. It's what the career advisors in the school, who were a little bit useless, honestly, said, okay, well, you should, study English. And at A-level, it was English, media, and history. So those three kind of made sense. Humanities subjects with a bit of media thrown in. So a little bit like Thomas, I managed to get a bit of experience in like film making and radio. I mean, stuff that again is slightly irrelevant today because it would be podcasting. And then when I applied for universities, I'm from Essex. I'm the first person in my family to go to university. We didn't have a clue really which universities were good and which weren't. And so I was flailing around a bit. Actually, for some reason, I also was having a fashion moment, and I thought I wanted to do fashion journalism, and I'm quite pleased I didn't, because it would have put me in a real box. And luckily, very blindly, one of the universities I applied to was King's College in London. I knew I wanted to be in London. I always loved London, and I thought it was where things happened and where opportunities would happen for me. So yeah, luckily I got into King's to study English literature and language. And so, what I love about university is it teaches you critical thinking. So regardless of what course you do, I think you learn some good skills. And like Thomas says, you get to go and see bands and just do a whole bunch of stuff that you absolutely didn't get to do in your hometown. And so for me, when I did what I was told, really. I did what was assumed. I mean, like retrospectively, the job that I got out of university was my dream job on a national newspaper, doing the job I wanted, which was investigative journalism. But had I studied something maybe more useful at university, like international relations or something, maybe that would have helped me out a bit more. Instead, I did a postgraduate actually, stupidly, at the university, one of my friends was friends with the royal and religious correspondent at the Sunday Times, not exactly a topic I was interested in, but he was someone that was extremely old school and didn't know how to type on a keyboard, literally. He would write all his stories out by hand. And he was a really good journalist, but he was, I guess, kind of lazy. And so to him, having an assistant was very useful. And my friend, because I told everyone I knew that I wanted to be a journalist, no one who was friends with me was in any doubt. Eventually that kind of comes to fruition, and he recommended me to this friend of his, and the friend said, come and do 2 weeks work experience with me. And I was over the moon. It was the best possible thing that could have happened. I was so excited. It was like all my Christmases had come at once. So then when I got there, I just worked really hard until they hired me, basically. But what was stupid, I think, a little bit on my part, was I then felt a bit insecure about my abilities, felt that I had to go and do a postgraduate NCTJ course in journalism in Harlow. And I was getting up at like 5 a.m. and driving for 2 hours to get there and doing like 2 days a week or 3 days a week on this course and then the rest at the paper, so that I could learn shorthand and things. You know, looking back on it, it wasn't that necessary, but it gave me a little bit more confidence, I guess. Yeah.
So for students who are graduating soon or have just graduated, who really want to get into this sort of writing industry, what advice would you give? What do you think is the thing that really helped you get in so much? Do you think that we're better off really trying to network and gain experience first? Or do you think that going out and freelancing is a better place to start? What do you think, Thomas?
I think there are many routes in. You know, I started at the very bottom of the ladder and took every step on that ladder up. I know some people that, you know, I've met people that have just rolled into Beijing and they're like, if my article's not in the New York Times, then I'm not writing it. And best of luck to them if they have the skill or talent or indeed financial means to support themselves while they pursue that dream. For me, I knew I never wanted to be a teacher. It was just a means to an end. Firstly, a means to travel, and then a means to learn Chinese. And once I'd had sort of a year in South China and a year in North China, and gone and got my master's degree, I was pretty sure that I wanted to write. I just had no idea how one got into the industry. So I taught part-time for a while and would take any writing job that I could get. So copy editing. I did a bit for a phone company. They weren't very successful at the time. They're called Huawei. You may have heard of them. Yeah, old model. I did some copy editing, proofreading, some translation. I wrote for some of the amusing communist dailies like Shenzhen Daily and China Daily, which just, they paid abysmally and you couldn't really say anything, but it was a chance to get my name in print. And that eventually led to me getting a job at an expat magazine, which was at the time, that's PRD, that's Pearl River Delta, which covered Guangzhou and Shenzhen for the large number of foreigners living in those cities. That was tough, challenging, but amazing, because working for a free media platform like that, I was able to make potentially all the mistakes that anyone might make, and to also have a try at everything. So you did sports writing, business writing, fashion writing, food writing, and of course, travel writing, features. So that was a great way to cut my teeth. And after I finished at the magazine, after 3.5 years, I felt confident to approach editors in London or Singapore, Hong Kong or New York in ways that I wouldn't have had I not served essentially an apprenticeship. So that's how I got in.
It's really interesting. So did you, once you got into freelancing, did you just write articles that you felt were really important at the time and then propose those? Or do you seek like a proposal from the editor before you start writing something?
So I was very fortunate. I built a huge network, especially in Hong Kong, because Shenzhen and Guangzhou are so near to Hong Kong that when I left, it almost felt like people were waiting for me to write for them. And that's a very spoilt position to be in writing. A publisher, I knew a British publisher wanted to produce a guidebook, so I got to do my first guidebook very quickly. And the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong has a Sunday magazine called Post Magazine, and they publish 3 long-word features a week. So that's 3,000-word features. That's a long article. In the days in the day we live in, where people read on their mobile phone and perhaps read 100 or 200 words, to be regularly asked to write 3,000 words on a given topic is, fantastic for a writer. And also being paid by the word, you make more money. So I was very fortunate in my proximity to Hong Kong at that time. It was like a trampoline into the big league, if you will.
Thank you. So comparatively, Sarah, how did you get into journalism? I know you mentioned that you got lucky with some experience, but what do you think is most useful in really trying to get into that industry and get started?
It's kind of hard because I think sometimes those opportunities look kind of lucky, and you could attribute it to luck. But I think for me, I mean, I didn't have a good network. I wasn't one of those people who's like dad knew a load of people or whatever. I wasn't that person. So the first step, being at university with a bunch of people whose dads maybe did know that person, that's a half step. So I think for me, just being determined and putting it out there, and I wrote articles for the university newspaper, and I did work experience even when I was like 14, and the first opportunity we got, I went and did an internship, work experience, I should say, on Sugar magazine, which was, a teen girls magazine up in London. So, from day one, I guess there was a determination there that kind of meant that it had to happen eventually, just because I think when you tell enough people what you're trying to achieve, opportunities will present themselves. And when you just take, like Thomas said, when you take every opportunity that's given to you to work for free or paid, then you take it. And I think the reality in journalism, I assume still, but perhaps not, certainly when I was younger, I'm 38 now, by the way, in case that helps, was that you had to work for free. That was just a given. No one was going to give you a chance if you were completely unproven. And yes, you might think you're a good writer for, in your class or whatever, but in the wider world, you need to gain a lot of experience. So I think working for free is just a given if you want to get your foot in the door, and then you just have to work your ass off to prove yourself. And at the end, that's what I did at the Sunday Times. And then I met my then partner, and then we moved to China together to help set up Time Out. And that was great just because that was a completely different type of writing. Obviously, it was the beauty of being able to write about fashion and shopping, and go to a new restaurant opening and write about artists and movie stars and review films. And I mean, just to be in Beijing pre-Olympics, when it was a lot more open than it is now, honestly, was a real treat, because my network going back to those days is fantastic. Thomas would probably tell you, it was very easy to hang out with some what are today pretty big names, because it was quite a small foreign community. And again, just putting yourself out there. And I think people often consider the word networking to be kind of a dirty word, and it's something that I thought was a very cynical kind of activity. I guess it wasn't something that I was particularly confident in doing, because I imagine standing in a room full of people with drinks and like shuffling up to them and being like, hello, giving them a business card. That's not what networking is, really. Building your network just means being interested in people and getting their contacts, and putting them in the back of your mind and trying to find ways to help them, because I think eventually they'll also that what goes around comes around. And the bigger your network of friends, people, contacts that you can call on when you need to write a story and you need what's the word, a quote or a source, you need somebody, you need those people. And it really helps to have got their, met them somewhere followed up by email with just a hi, you know, it's great to meet you. Maybe send them something in the interim that you think will interest them. And then maybe 9 months, a year later, when you're writing a story and you need a quote from someone, you can go back to them. Journalism is a lot of that, and you have to be super resourceful. And so your network matters a lot, but it doesn't have to be networking in the kind of cheesy sense of the word. I think it's really just about putting yourself out there and being friendly and helpful.
Thank you. That's really, really valuable advice. So both of you have obviously ended up in China for a bit, which is really cool and seems very far away, I think, for a lot of us. But how did you build the confidence to think, yes, like, I'm just going to move the other side of the world, you know, I'm just going to take my career over there? And then how did you prepare for that, and sort of in terms of confidence and finances and just general, I guess, finding roles over there? Did you know that there was, I mean, Sarah, you've mentioned that you working over there on time out, but Thomas as well, did you have sort of a job set up, or was it very much like I'm just going to do it, I'm just going to make a really big change and see how it goes? I can see that you're on a little adventure there.
Yeah, I'm just moving because some Malay workers have just turned up, making all sorts of noise. So I've moved into my room. I hope that's okay.
Of course, I love how you're living the full travel writer lifestyle right now.
Yeah, I'm really sort of living the stereotype. So to answer that question, I'd just like to follow on quickly from just what Sarah was saying before about networking. I think she made some really good points. There were all these networking events in China in those days, sort of come to the Ritz-Carlton. You have to pay money for a ticket unless you're a VIP. Usually if you work for an expat magazine, you could get in for free. And you'd meet a bunch of not that interesting, sort of self-important foreigners. The networking that I did, and I think sounds similar, is the hard work where you spend time in the arena that you want to work in, which is, you know, for me, I was very interested in the Beijing art scene, so I'd spend a lot of time in galleries and art villages and music festivals and get to know those people, the people that you wouldn't meet at a networking event, but were really going to say something. You know, in those days, you know, you could run into Ai Weiwei at a gallery show. You can still run into quite a few well-known acts in Beijing. Cui Jian, the rock star, still occasionally shows his face in sort of punk rock dives. So those are the people you want to be friendly with. Usually the people that are trying to be known are less interesting to actually know. In terms of editors, many of the ones that I've worked with the longest, I've never met or met them once. They're just an email address away. And I'm perfectly happy to keep the relationship that way. So that's just following on from the important thing that was being made then. But you asked me the confidence to move to China. My first job I did have set up. My first job was a teaching job. And I chose it because it was British run. There seemed to be, and it was a small company as well, wasn't this nationwide factory school, because I felt more confident if it was British run that there would be someone on my cultural wavelength. And if it was a small company, that I wouldn't get stuck in some awful corporate bureaucracy where if I had a complaint, you know, it had to be sent to head office in Shanghai or something like that. So that's how I came the first time. But since my postgrad, it's just mostly been winging it in China. For a long time, China was a good place to wing it. I'm not sure it is anymore, but for a long time it was.
You're telling us not to just jump the gun and come to China then?
Sure, go for it. If we're talking more specifically about China right now, you know, things like Gotoco are just a fabulous introduction to the country, you know, where you can go for a couple of months without committing your life away. But if after you graduate, you do decide to go to China, I think China in 2006 was a freelancer's paradise. I'm not sure it is anymore. They're much stricter about visas and what exactly you are doing in their country, which is fair enough. And I would say, have a focus. Why are you going there? Where are you going there? And what are you going to do? And if you can get a gig lined up before you go, then that's a pretty smart move. So you turn up with a visa, a house, and a job, rather than none of those things. That would be my advice on China.
So just quickly leading off from China not necessarily being the best place to be a freelancer in the next few years, have you got plans to move around? Well, I know that you're in Malaysia now. Obviously, you're quite grounded now. You've got great experience, and you've mentioned obviously you've got a lot of jobs that are just consistent for you. But for someone really trying to get into freelance and travel writing, is there anywhere in the world that you think would be a good place to look at starting other than China?
Yeah, China is still a really good one because it's so big and so diverse. It means that you can do a lot on one visa. It's almost like if you think of each province as the size of a European country, that's a lot of territory that you're colonizing. So when we say colonize, a lot of travel writers and indeed journalists will colonize a certain territory, which means that they learn the language and they understand the culture of that particular area, and they make it their own. Like Pico Aya is very Japan focused or whatever. So China's still not a bad one. And the fact that some bad things happen in China, if you're a writer, that's something to write about. You know, the reason why Japan is not in the news all the time is because it's pretty stable and not too much anything happens there really. Whereas in China, you know, history is being made for the good and for the bad. India, Russia, the United States, these are enormous countries. So you get to cover a lot of ground, or indeed learning something like Arabic and making North Africa and the Middle East your territory is another good thing. In terms of where would be, you know, freelancer heaven, certainly countries in Southeast Asia are less strict than, say, China, but also Japan and South Korea, Taiwan, because, you know, these are developed places. They can control their borders better. Somewhere like Laos doesn't have the infrastructure to really manage a floating population of foreigners that you know can get visas in various ways. But I would say, despite my beginning this poolside, paradise doesn't exist on earth. It's going to be a struggle wherever you go. So make sure you are passionate about that culture and that place. There were too many people in China, especially, just surfing the economic boom or being in China because they didn't know where else to be. And that's no good. You've got to really love it, warts and all.
Thank you. That's good advice. I think it's very easy as well to get caught up in the idea of a place before you get there, and then having your expectations really not quite being the same as the reality.
Sure.
So Sarah, what did you have sort of put in place when you got there? How did you find the confidence to move to China, and how did you get started? What was your experience like?
To be completely honest with you, I didn't have the confidence to move to China by myself. I was actually a bit of a mess. So I had been caught up in the terrorist attacks in London in 2005. I was on one of the trains that was bombed. I wasn't injured, but needless to say, it was fairly traumatic. And this happened in July 2005. And in August 2005, my boyfriend, who also worked at the paper but on the foreign desk, said, "Oh, I've been offered this great job in China, you know, and it starts in October. Do you want to come?" And I was just like, I don't know if I can do it. this one out. And at that time, I think London scared me, and the paper made my life really difficult on that story. And so actually, you know, the job and the city and all those things that I loved had really lost their gloss, honestly. And so when it came to making the decision to come to China, I'm not entirely sure I really made it as myself. It was a really stressful time, and it just seemed like I didn't have a choice to me at the time. And so when I arrived here, I was, even though I was excited about it, I had been to China on a holiday that same year in February, just for a couple of weeks. And I didn't see myself living here. And so, yeah, it was an exciting time to be here pre-Olympics, but also in 2005, Beijing was basically an enormous construction site. It was just so polluted, and there were cranes and holes on every corner, and they were demolishing half the place. It wasn't exactly a dream destination. But it turned out to be, I think, because you know, the good thing about Time Out was it forced me to learn about the city and to get out and to meet people. And I didn't speak any Chinese, you know. The China thing was definitely my boyfriend's dream, not mine. He was the one that studied at SOAS and spoke Chinese and stuff, and had traveled around the country first. And so, yeah, I didn't really have much of a leg to stand on. So I definitely really admire people that did it by themselves, honestly, because I think that does take quite a lot of bravery. But of course, I think once you get there, it's what you make of it, right? I think again, the more you engage, the more you do, the more you get out there, the more you like practice your Chinese if it's terrible, or Spanish if you're in Latin America or whatever, the more you practice it, the better you get, right? And there's no shortcut. And what was great for me was that I was able to turn that knowledge that I had of Beijing when it was basically rebuilding itself in the early days. It was like starting from scratch. You know, you walk around London and you could never have an encyclopedic knowledge really of every corner of London. It's too big and too old and too layered. Beijing wasn't really. You know, you could count the number of good restaurants on one hand in 2005. So that changed a lot, and I was there to watch that happen and to be part of that. And so then I went from having sort of very little value, I guess, to, you know, what would be potential clients later on, or even editors who wanted pieces from China, to someone who actually had a lot of value. But it took a few years. It wasn't until 2009, so 3-4 years later, that I then decided to start this company, and I wrote long form freelance pieces for the Telegraph, and got to interview movie stars and write about women's issues and things like that. So that all came a bit later, but I had to go through that quite difficult period, I think, for me, because like I said, I didn't exactly choose China. So it took a little bit of time to get used to it, but I did make the most of it, I guess. And that's how, in the end, you're able to make yourself useful eventually, I think.
Sorry if there's noise in the background, someone's running their door. I hope you can hear me. So I'd love to know a little bit more, and I think a lot of people would, about then your company, Bespoke. So how you moved more into that, how you decided that you want to run that, and the kind of services and everything that involves.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like an obvious transition, but in the early days, what I saw, again, around the Olympics, was a lot of foreigners coming into China, and they were just clueless. And no one was really helping them. There wasn't really anything. All the guidebooks, we'd written a guidebook for Time Out, you know, a Time Out Beijing guidebook. And I think to this day, there was only one version of it, one edition. But as soon as we wrote it, it was out of date. I mean, guidebooks, you know, as soon as you could write these things and get them published and then get them out into the world, you know, it was Beijing. They demolished something and a new thing crops up a week later. That's Asia, actually. Asia moves really quickly, and no guidebook could ever keep up with it. So the problem was there was a bunch of tourists walking around sort of, you know, oh, I thought this was supposed to be the best duck restaurant. They're staring at a brick wall or a hole in the ground, or an Italian restaurant. You know, it was just completely out on a limb. And I knew what was annoying to me is, you know, when working for Time Out, it's a content magazine. You've got all this content in your head, right? You have a mental map of the whole city because it's your job to know the city really well. And when you're sitting on all this knowledge and you're just watching people struggle, and also you become a kind of beacon for people asking you questions. So throughout the Olympics, it was, oh, can you talk, you know, my friend wants a duck restaurant. Which one's the best? Oh, which hotel's the best? Oh, do you know a tour guide that speaks English? What time should they go to the Forbidden City? Can you talk to the taxi driver? You know, half the time I didn't even know these people. I thought I should charge for this. Why am I doing this for free? Because there's obviously a demand for it. And so actually Bespoke started off as a completely different type of company. What I thought was helping people. I wanted to help people tour independently, but in an empowered way and in a really up-to-date way. So we would create these sort of pocket guides that consisted of individual pages with individual venues and sites and things and lots of insider tips. And we would assemble them based on clients, what they wanted. So if they were vegetarian, we'd just give them vegetarian restaurants. And if they were interested in history, we'd send them to those sites. And then it came with a local cell phone. This was before apps, remember, came with a local cell phone. And we were on the other end of it, so that if they needed translation help, or if they just needed to ask someone what the hell was going on with this guy yelling at them, or how do I top up my phone, or how do I buy this ticket, they don't understand me, we were on the other end of it. I thought this was a great idea. Everybody that used it loved it, but not enough people really understood it. So yeah, eventually it kind of molded into a different type of more full service company. But at the beginning it was very content focused, so I was still writing a lot, but I was trying to make money out of it in a different kind of way, because I saw that there was a need for it over here. And the traditional, you know, companies, or, you know, even the Guardian or whatever, it didn't matter. Whatever you put out, you know, SEO plays a big part. If people Google, you know, Beijing street food, even now, what they get is going to be gone. So I wanted to find a way to get that content that I enjoyed creating across to people in a way that actually made sense and was a bit more practical. So that's why I ended up starting this company.
That's really cool. It's definitely something I've never thought about, but it would have been so useful when I've been traveling to all of these places. It's definitely really exciting. I'll be reaching out to you when I can finally go on a trip.
Yeah, all of us feel like that, I think.
Yeah. So for both of you, how valuable do you feel language was? I know, Tom, you said that you speak Mandarin. I don't know how much Mandarin you speak, Sarah, or if you speak any other languages, either of you. But do you think it's essential to know a language, or do you think you can get there and kind of learn? Like, how much of a benefit do you think that knowing the language offers? Thomas, do you maybe want to start?
For China, it's pretty useful. I'm not going to lie. I've made almost, hopefully I've made money out of being a good writer in English, but that's been paired with being able to interview people in Mandarin and translate documents and ask important questions. China, despite the legions of English teachers and the vast sums of money it spends on learning what is currently the global lingua franca, it is not, as soon as you get in the provinces, there's very few people that speak English with any fluency or any zest. You could probably live in a expat bubble in Beijing or Shanghai more so, and get by on English. Certainly there's business people that get by in China without English, but they have the sort of financial means to pay for translators and interpreters. But travel writing is not obviously exclusive, or even journalism exclusively about China, though we're sort of quite China focused. So I would say it would depend on your territory. So certainly if you were a travel writer focused in France to this day, you would need good French. But if you're working in the Netherlands, then I don't think you will need Dutch, it won't help your career one bit. But I think it's also a form of respect. Like, do you respect these people? Are you willing to go past the superficial? And also, language and culture are sort of bound together. I used the example of France and China, which are the two foreign countries that I've really lived in, and both are sort of just inseparable from their, how they communicate, their literary tradition, their poetic tradition, and their cultural landscape, which is why the French, are so resistant to the creeping tide of English, and the Chinese to some degree as well. And I think as China becomes more powerful, I think it will invest more and more in converting the world to Mandarin rather than converting its own population to the English language. That remains to be seen, but it's certainly in Thailand, Mandarin has become incredibly popular. Vietnam, neighboring countries that realize that they need this language in Asia, as Asia is now. That said, no matter how good your Chinese is or how long you study it, they'll still point out that you don't know an idiom from the Tang Dynasty or some poet from the Song Dynasty. So it's a lifelong endeavor that you will never finish. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. So languages, I think, are such a challenge for so many people as well. But
especially,
so you do feel, yeah,
especially for Brits, I think Brits. I read in a book, I forget which book it was. It said we are proudly monolingual. That's an awful place to be. Most people in the world speak 2 or 3 languages. It's normal to be bi or even trilingual. But in the UK, if you can cough out a few bad sentences of French or Spanish, you're suddenly this sort of intellectual marvel. Whereas anywhere else, people will be, and then some. So I would say definitely as an English speaker, focus on learning another language. It will help you no end in this industry.
Thank you, Thomas. Sarah, what have your experiences been with languages and all of your writing experience? Do you think they're useful? How's your Mandarin?
Yeah, my Mandarin will probably always be intermediate, I think. So the problem is my Chinese has been picked up through, I did have classes at the beginning, and then I tried again in probably year 3. And then, like my Chinese teacher got pregnant, so that was it. She didn't come back to work. Then another one moved to Shanghai. And every time I got another one, so I sort of thought, is this not meant to be? I really love languages. Like Thomas said, I can cough out a few sentences in like Italian and Spanish. But the difficult thing about Chinese is that you can't learn it by osmosis. I would spend summers in Italy and I'd come back and I could basically be fluent enough, right? And that's the joy of those like Latin languages, where if you don't know the word, you can take an intelligent guess, especially if you kind of study literature, English or whatever. But in Chinese, unless you sit down and you study those characters by rote and you put in the time, and it's kind of crushing, a bit spirit crushing sometimes, then you don't really get very far, or you hit the ceiling like I have. And then when you on that ceiling, if you can get by and you can communicate with most people and you can do the things that you need to every day, then it's very hard to find the will to go the next step. But I really agree with Thomas when he says, I totally agree about you should always learn the language if you're going to a new country, even if it's the basics, because it's respectful, and B, people like it and they engage with you more, and you actually get to learn something about them, and culture is bound up with the language. So there are some subtleties that even if I was trying to interview someone in, Chinese, or let's say I'm asking the question. So there was an example where I did an interview with an actress. She's supposed to be China's answer to Angelina Jolie. She's like a big kind of, human rights activist, as much as you can be one of those in China. I was asking the questions in Chinese, and my assistant was sort of translating them, and we were taping it and getting the answers. Now, the point is, I could probably only get 50–60% of what she was saying, but that's also enough to add to understand, you know, just simple things like facial expressions in China, things that you like. People laugh when they're embarrassed. We don't laugh when we're embarrassed in the West. That's kind of rude. There are a whole bunch of things that are completely different in other cultures, and unless you sort of bothered to understand that or learn the language to a level where you can at least pick up on those things, then you are a little bit lost. But it does take a lot of dedication, especially with something like Chinese, because in order to be able to, you really need to be able to do it to a good level if you're going to interview politicians or whoever it is, because you can't afford to mistranslate those things really and misquote people, especially in certain situations. So yeah, I agree with Thomas, basically.
So get learning, basically.
Yeah, it's always fun, doesn't it? Right?
Yeah, that's true. It's just a bit of extra study, isn't it? So you two have both been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for all of the tips that you've given us so far. It is so exciting hearing about everything that you guys have done. But I think we'll just ask you some questions that people have submitted now, since we're coming towards the end. So first of all, we have a question asking, when you're writing for a country guide or a rough guide, so it's maybe Lonely Planet, Thomas, are you given the funds to go to the country to investigate and write the guide, or did you fund that trip yourself?
Every company pays differently, but for rough guides, I was given a budget. It's a bit of a meager budget. I actually put bespoke travel in the edition that's yet to publish. Should have published this year, but of course COVID-19. But actually went on a freebie in Shanghai based on the I'm a travel writer thing. And then you can do that a little bit with certain companies. Just say, hey, you know, I'm doing this guidebook. I hear your thing is great. Can I try it out? But I've never been one for major freebies, because they often backfire. Like, why isn't our hotel at the front of the Lonely Planet on the cover with fireworks or whatever? So it's usually best to just go it alone. But one tip that you should take to heart if you want to be a travel writer is everything pays thrice. So you get a guidebook and it sends you to, say, Vietnam. You go to the destination, you update the guidebook. You then sell a travel story about that destination to a newspaper and one more to a website. And then you've done 1, 2, 3 payments. And then the job is lucrative. If you don't do it like that, you'll probably go bankrupt quite a young age.
I love that. That's good advice. Thank you, Thomas. I don't know if you have anything that you really wanted to add to that, Sarah.
No, I got a freebie out of your company.
No, not at all. Because I totally agree. I mean, I've been on both sides of that, and it's quite funny because I think at Time Out you were never allowed to take freebies. It was part of their whole ethos. You know, it was really not done. And whereas sometimes there are publications, and I can't actually think of any now, but they'll pay you so abysmally that you've no choice. Like, they're not, you know, you can't go and try out this hotel and pay for this hotel when they're paying you, you know, 50 quid for the whole thing. What's the point? So, you know, sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's not. Yeah, it totally depends on the publication, but I agree that it makes sense to try and get more than one article out of it. You have to be quite disciplined, and it takes a lot of planning actually and hustle to do that, but it makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
So another question we have is, do you guys have any tips on getting work and projects published or picked up, such as newspapers and magazines, or would it be better to just do it on our own, like blogs or websites? Thomas, I don't know if you've got any advice on
I've
this
got,
one.
I've got a website. I grudgingly have a website now. I never, I've done paid blogs where some company was like, they were a tour operator and they wanted lots of just glossy China stories. But I never really blog for myself. I think that whole thing came a little bit after my career had already started. So I don't know how effective it is in getting a career started.
Fair enough. So have you got anything to add to that, Sarah? Do you think it's like better to try and get stuff picked up by current sort of publications, or start on our own kind of website?
The reason I'm kind of reluctant to answer this with any confidence is all I can give you is my experience, and that is that there is so much noise online that it's really hard, I think, to get noticed. Video, we know, tends to overtake written blogs these days. People's attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. For me, the way to do it was absolutely to approach bigger names, get some of those under your belt, whether it's for free or cheap or whatever, or work experience or whatever you can do to just get a byline, because that's what matters, so that you can then reference that to the next person and the next person, or then, you know, the next publication and the next publication. I think only once you've got those under your belt, no matter who they are really, could you start to then say, put them all on a website, so you've got a sort of living record of your work. I mean, literally, I've got a bunch of cuts, you know, like newspaper clippings in a big old book. I mean, it's old school. That's not useful anymore. I can't send them to anyone. I'm not going to send them a scan. So, you know, I think if you know, online is great, but doing it for yourself, if nobody knows who you are, unless you're doing something really niche, I think it's really hard to get traction. I think you're much better off leveraging work that you do for other people at the beginning.
That's a good idea, definitely, to like keep everything in one place. So also, someone else has asked, if you're not doing more of a literature or journalist based degree, do you think there is still room to come into the travel writing or the journalism industry? Do you think there's some crossover? And if not, is there any advice you'd have for trying to create experience, I guess, or gain a pathway into this area if you do not have a degree that's focused on writing? Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if there's one thing that I wish that you get told as a young person, but I suppose not that helpful, is your degree, unless you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, is basically irrelevant, I think. Like I said, for me, it doesn't matter what degree you do to a certain extent, unless it's extremely vocational. It's about critical thinking. It's about the network you gain. It's about all of that. Anyone can go into journalism. I mean, and there's all sorts of types of journalism, right? There's business journalism, there's sports journalism, there's fashion, news, travel. So in the end, I think if people are going to hire you, they're looking at you as a person, as a rounded human being. When I get CVs at Bespoke, I don't even look at I don't care what university people went to. And I kind of wish people had told me that. The experience is so valuable. I always think people should go to university if they're able to, and they're able to afford it, and they get the opportunity. But the subject you do, I don't think necessarily has a strong bearing on what you're able to do after university, provided you come across well and you can show that you've used your time at university well. I mean, you could study archaeology and still write for the university newspaper and show an interest in writing, right? So
Thank you. Thomas, have you got anything that you want to add to that?
Just follow on from one point she made, which was like niche writing can be really something to get into. There's a lot of like fluffy arts majors like me who want to travel and think about the philosophy of being a world wanderer. there's a lot of us. There's not many people writing about tech in Shenzhen. So if you can write about tech in Shenzhen, excuse me, I'm getting attacked by mosquitoes here, then you really can carve out an extraordinary niche for yourself. That's just one example of thousands. But
a particularly good example, I think.
Yeah, I think that would be something. So if you had a degree, and asking someone like me with a liberal arts background to write about tech in Shenzhen, well, I'm only going to understand technology very superficially. Whereas if you have a degree that was orientated in that way, or experience that was orientated in that direction, you're going to be a much better writer about that topic. So that's Sarah talked a lot about the noise on the internet. There is so much noise. There's so much out there. So standing out, I often look at writers and I think that person stands out because they say, my name is Joe somebody, I live in Malaysia, and I write about food. And then you're like, we know exactly what this person does is wham, you know? I think that can be really helpful.
Thank you. So I think we're sadly coming to the end of our time. You two have been so helpful, so welcoming. So it's just been really, really interesting as well, just to hear about your different perspectives. So thank you so much for joining. I'm especially keen as an English literature student to hear about these options. So I know a lot of students have really enjoyed it, and I'm sure we can send you some of the positive feedback. We always get some nice messages afterwards. So yeah, I just want to say thank you again. And I think to all of the students out there, I'm sure we'll be writing like a blog post or something on this with like some of the top takeaways, and there'll be links and stuff to Sarah's and Thomas's pieces of work. You guys can check out, see what they're up to, check out all of their stuff. So yeah, thank you so much for coming. And if you have any questions about Edu-venture Society and how to set it up, please don't hesitate to message me on LinkedIn or send us an email through the website, and we can let you know more information on that. So I don't know if Richard has anything that he would like to add as we wrap up. He's here. I don't know if he's here. Hello.
No, nothing to add, just thank you. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure we're getting loads of questions in, and we will, as I said, try and answer those in the blog. But that was just really inspiring and interesting, and thank you so much, Sarah and Tom, for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.